I don't know what. Hello and welcome back to another week of the True That Show. We are very excited today because not only are we going to talk about one of everybody's favorite topics, which is sport and what it means to you, and all the different sports that are out there. Isn't it interesting, as we were talking earlier, about the multitude of sports and why you're attracted to one over the other, and just that whole arena of sports. But I'm not going to talk about that because we have Brent today to talk about that. But here's the wonderful thing about this gentleman's story is going from that decision to start a podcast. And honestly, what an interesting arena to be in. And of course, Caroline, as you know, we went through that process as well as the decision to have a podcast, what that meant, and to be able to create one. So I have to say, Caroline, what made you decide to say yes?
Well, it's funny because as you were talking, I was thinking about Brent, and I was like, well, his the way he made his decision made sense, because we're going to talk about him in a minute. But he went from his career that was pretty much that, interviewing people and doing, reports and everything. I don't understand why, where it came from, because besides doing presentations, I never interview anyone. So what made me say yes? I know this woman who's very, 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 persuasive. So when she wants something, she makes sure it's going to happen. And then there's, she gets up those mornings and she's like, hey, I had a dream that we had this. And quite often it turns into a project. Like, hey, I had a dream that we published a book. And hey, I had a dream that we had a podcast. And hey, I had a dream we were on a stage. So I'm grateful for this woman. But that's how I said yes. Basically, it's because I had no arguments to say no. And I'm glad I said yes. It's been quite a journey. We've met such amazing people. And again, today, you're going to meet another amazing person that, I met on Facebook, and it was totally, serendipitous, because we were not even friends on Facebook. So I don't even know how I came across this post, and I probably came across a post that he's not posting too often. So it was really, it was really timing, but I'm sure we're going to bring you an amazing other stories. So you, Deb, what made you say yes, or what made you make me say yes?
What made you make me say yes? Well, probably karma, because there's been some things that you make me do that I'm like, I'm not quite sure about this, but we have, it's kind of like, I call Caroline like my business wife, and I don't get to say no, and she doesn't say no. And that's why it worked. People like, how can you stay together so long? I'm like, because we don't say no to each other. But, when you look at the theme behind what we did, so both, I think people that are watching know that we've had a journey, feels like a lifetime journey of entrepreneurship. And just, we really, truly believe in the story behind the story. And I think the biggest thing about being an entrepreneur is the passing the wand of hope, right? Because no one decides to become an entrepreneur to not be successful, and it's to push their own boundaries. And so having our podcast is that platform to have people to come on, to share their story, to expand it out. I mean, that's what broadcasting is, right? It's like getting it out there to the world. And I think it was definitely a process for us, that time commitment. And then I think everyone goes through at a certain point. Like I remember the first book that Shakti Gaiwan put out, and she's a famous author that I love to follow. And she's like, who am I? Like, who am I to put this stuff out there? Who am I to write this book? Who am I to do this podcasting, right? And so it's been really an interesting journey. But honestly, truth be told, to tell our listeners, and I think most of them know, that all of the business presentations we did together, and it was the bantering that people were coming back to hear the banter, not necessarily what we were saying, but how we were saying it. There's something about making fun of each other that's a real turn on for people. And that's how our audience started. But that's us. Let's get into Brent's story, because I think it's incredible. I thought how interesting that we've got two people podcasting, interviewing as someone who's in a podcast, sharing it with someone else. So everyone's got their own story and journey. So everybody, please welcome Brent Wallace. And you're going to be listening because you're on a podcast, but also, Brent, just to let you know, this video will go everywhere. And so people will see you as well. We forgot to let you know that. So you might want to do that before we start, that this will be visual. So, tell us your story on who you are and how you ended up at TSN, and what are you doing and why?
Wow. I feel like you need a couch for me to lay down on for all those questions, but let's start with, I went to a broadcasting school in Halifax, ended up getting a volunteer job at the local TV station, which was now a global TV station. I'm going to make this the Cole's Notes version. So I volunteered, and it ended up being 1 hour a night, 2 hours a night, and eventually became 6 hours. I worked after broadcasting school. I worked Monday to Friday at Canadian Tire, like 8 to 5, and then volunteered 6 to midnight. So that was for like a year. So it was exhausting for that year, but I wouldn't have obviously changed it. Then Global opened a new TV station in Montreal in 97. So they hired me as one of their first sports people there. So that was like, great, this is a full-time job. This is what I want to do. 8 months into that, they canceled the sports part. And so they just made me a cameraman. And I was like, this isn't going to work. And then 3 months in, so we're 11 months in, Michael Whalen, who was the TSN reporter in Montreal, said, hey, there's an opening in Ottawa for TSN. I've already called my boss. You're to call him tomorrow morning. I had no idea this was going on. Anyways, at the end of an Expos game, that's how long ago it was. And so I called the next day, and 2 weeks later, they had hired me at TSN. So that was August 1998. And then things seemed to be going really well for 22 and a half years. And then in February, I got a call that they were making some cuts, and I was one of them. So here I am.
Wow.
That's probably like the call that no one wants to have. And actually, I will share with
No.
You know, what attracted my attention to Brent. We were not even friends on Facebook. So I just saw one of his posts that it was not too long after the news he had. And I'm not going to say more because I want you to express like how you actually shared it. Because like I was telling Deborah, it's rare. I don't want to, you know, be sexist here, but men usually don't share this vulnerable on shit on Facebook, and especially not a sports guy. You know, usually they'll be like, "Ah, I'm okay,"
Yep.
you know. But you shared it beautifully, that how you felt, and I guess you were in transition to something else. So just share a bit about that. How did you?
So, yeah, like. Well, in the world of social media, either you get ahead of it or you have to play catch up and really quick. And so I've been in the spotlight, you know, for my entire career. So I don't know how not to be. And so do you hide behind and sit in the corner and pout about losing your job? Or do you try to say, listen, I lost it, but this is what's going on. So I try to be very open and upfront, because I'm invading your house every night on a nightly basis for, you know, 2 decades. You get to know me, but you only see the good, right? But you have to be able to see the bad. You have to be able to share that stuff too. So you accept that part, or you should accept that part. If you're going to be in broadcasting, or you're going to be an athlete, or anybody in the public eye, you have to accept the other stuff. So, and I knew my kids would know soon. So I had to, and they happened to just be home because they were during COVID, everybody's home. So I got the call at 10:15. And they said, you have 15 minutes until we wipe your phone and all your contacts are gone. And so now I'm reeling. I don't know what's going on, right? And I'm a middle-aged guy who all I do is talk for a living. Like, why I can't go down the street? Do you have any openings at this job? So terrified beyond belief, a complete mess. But I know I have to go over and tell my kids, like, all those great things and all those perks we used to have working at TSN, it's gone. I don't work at TSN anymore. And my daughter's like, are we going to lose our house? And that was the hardest thing for me. I wasn't prepared for it. I knew they'd be upset. I wasn't prepared for it. And then the phone call started. And so for 4 days, didn't do anything except take phone calls, answer texts. And with all that, I had no idea what was going on in my head. I remember I'm crying all the time, sitting on my bedroom floor, trying to explain to people what's going on, trying to be cool for the kids. Like, hey, it's cool. It's okay. Don't worry. But you have to accept that this is really, really hard. So I knew I have a therapist, because a couple of years ago, the one thing that the NHL is trying to do, at least, or I should almost say pro sports, and even in society, we're trying to talk more about mental health issues. And we're trying to push it out there that if you're a guy, it's okay. It is okay to say, I'm not okay, and I need someone to talk to. And I remember there's a good friend of mine, Gord Wilson, covers the Ottawa Senators. And he said, Brent, listen, one thing you always need to make sure you have is someone to talk to. Find someone. He goes, could be a best friend, could be a therapist, just find someone. And so I decided to find a therapist to chat. Like, I'll go in and tell jokes to my therapist. We just sit and chat for a bit. Like, it's like, you just need a release sometimes. So I remember calling him right away. I'm like, I need to get in to see you. And he's like, I'll find some time. So and you just have to admit that you are vulnerable. And that was what it was. It became a mental, like, it was a hard thing. I didn't sleep, right? The stress factor of, how do I provide for my family? What do I do next? What all do I do? And then, so I remember, taking down anything that was TSN related. And I always made the joke, if I ever got fired from TSN, I wouldn't have any clothes to wear. And I had like 6 shirts left, I think, by the end of it. Like, I have luggage, I have jackets, I have, sunglasses, like, you name it, mugs. So I started just to put it all away and just try and move on. And that's just led me to trying to decide what to do next, which is me talking again on some other platform.
I really commend you for sharing that, because I think that many people, I mean, we're in the world of entrepreneurship, and I've seen that happen to traditional business owners where the environment of their business changes and they've got to close their doors for whatever reason. And I've seen people in corporate have that experience. Thank you for sharing so vulnerably. And I think that a lot of the times we don't even realize that we're doing it, that we become what we do, right? We become what we do. Yeah. And then when we don't do what we do anymore and don't have the time to mentally process to make that decision ourselves, like when we choose to leave something, there's a process that we go through emotionally and mental health where we backtrack and the kind of the powers within us, and we have time to make decisions. But those instant, quick life experiences where everything changes and you can barely process what's going on, never mind having to wear many faces as a parent or a friend or a colleague. It's quite the process. So I commend you on that.
I feel like it's also,
well, that's a big thing too.
Sorry.
Like, one of the things is that's my identity. It was like my kids, when I traveled so much when I was like, they were, I think 150 days a year I was on the road. They thought my name was Brent Wallace, TSN Ottawa, because that's all they heard on the TV. And so it's your identity. And so like, you basically want, I don't know what's worse, either to be told you're leaving in 2 weeks or to be told that day you're done. Because either way, it's debilitating and it's extremely emotional. But is it harder to be told and then have 2 months or 2 weeks for it's your funeral? It's almost like a funeral. And so everybody's like, oh man, I love working with you. Take care. I wish you all the best. Like, and so I went through that for like 4 straight days. That becomes the really draining part. And so you just have to figure out a way to try and adapt to it and accept it. I almost think it's better to be told this way than to be told you're leaving in 2-3 weeks or whatever. But again, I don't want to go through it to find out the other way. I can tell you that.
I went through a similar experience, but it was more that I exploded and I was just like done. And they're like, okay, give me your phone, give me your computer, give me your keys. And my phone was like my personal, like I was attached to my phone, everything was in there, and my computer the same. And I remember that for me, that was something that was extremely hurtful, because it's like a relationship, it's like a marriage. And then you're like, well, I trusted you and you could trust me and keep, leave me my phone. So I think this is probably the fact of like, hey, you have 15 minutes. You don't have the time to process. But on the other end, like you say, it's not like a funeral where, everyone will slowly say bye. And, but I think that's, the 4 days that you went through is also like a way of you're really living your emotions. You didn't stay on your bedroom floor too long. You got back up and you said, hey, let's start something new. So where did the idea of this podcast come? And it's funny because as I mentioned to Deborah earlier, I'm not sure why it's not a surprise for you, because you were continuing Lane. So it's like you're continuing. It was an extension of what but how did it come to
you? That's a good question. So I months ago, I talked to a good friend of mine, Ian Mendes, who now works at The Athletic, but he worked at Bell Media at the radio station at the time. And we said we'd like to do a podcast together or whatever. But then things changed and we knew we couldn't do it until we switched jobs or whatever. So it got pushed aside. So then I think it's day 3, although the days become really blurry when you have no idea what days they are when you're laid off. So I think it's day 3 after TSN let me go. It's either the Friday or the Saturday. My wife says, hey, why don't you do a podcast? And she knew I thought about it before. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, why don't you call Mark Mathot? And I'm like, that's a good idea. So Mark Mathot's a retired NHL player, played 13 years, played 6 of them with Ottawa. He's from Ottawa. He's very well respected and he's really articulate. And I knew that when I worked at TSN, we wanted to have him at some point be part of our broadcast. So I knew he was really good at talking. So I reached out to him. And as soon as I called him, he's like, Wally, I've been waiting for your call. Let's do this. And I was like, this makes life so much easier. And he's like, I'm all in. I'm like, you're an NHL player. You've made a lot of money. You're 35. You're like, you don't need this headache. So he's like, don't worry, whatever, like, I'm all in, this will be great. And I'm like, I need to support my family somehow. So he's like, yep, we're good. So since that day, we've obviously been in contact every day, but he's still all in. Like, he's all in probably more today than he was when he first started. So that's important because at any moment he can go, you know what? I don't want to do this. It's a little tough. I put his name right in the logo. So he has to stay with me. It's basically what happened. So that part's been really good. And so since then, we've tried to figure out how to make this thing work, but it's been I will say a lot of sleepless nights. I will give you that.
So
sorry.
What's the purpose of the podcast? So you interview mostly hockey players. Is it like getting into their personal life, getting into them commenting on games? Like, what's in general, talk a bit about the mission of your podcast.
So we both understand it's hockey related because we don't know anything else, because that's all either one of us have ever done, it seems like. So that part's easy to talk hockey. We try to figure out or find a way to get players to open up. And so, as you know, when you watch interviews on TV, they're pretty vanilla because players don't like to chat. So, and they're kind of guarded against saying anything that's going to make people blow them up and make a big deal of something. So 2 things. One is we go longer in our interviews so that we can dig a little deeper and find out, and even stupid stuff like, what's your favorite snack, which surprisingly, a lot more people are interested in than I ever thought was possible. So if I don't ask it in one of our interviews, you'll see people on Twitter go, you didn't ask what his favorite snack was. So, well, and it's people from all walks, whether it's, we try to, for right now, it's been a lot of players or ex-players. We just had Tessa Bonhomme on, who's one of the great Olympians and now a broadcaster. We've had, other broadcasters on and whatnot. So we're trying to mold around the hockey world, but trying to include everybody in it. And so that's a big part of it. But we just try to get into just their lives and what they're like. We just want to know the behind the scenes stories. So with Meth, which is the worst nickname you can have if you're trying to have some kind of clean family fun podcast, his nickname is Meth. So we do things like cooking with Meth, which is just about him making snacks, but it just sounds really bad. Anyway, he gets the players to open up because they know where he's been and he knows where they're coming from. And there's also lots of stories that don't get told unless you kind of jar them or remember them, or they get to have that kind of, like, Meth and him went through it in 2017 together. So they get a little comfort, familiarity. And that's a big part of what we do.
It's very interesting. As a podcaster, thank you for sharing. As a podcaster, when we have people that come on, even people that are not necessarily out there in the world of maybe celebrityism, it's like, yeah. And Caroline's fantastic at this, because when people start or want to disclose, or we go down the rabbit hole a little bit, when I call it go down the rabbit hole, and people start to kind of shine on that personal stuff, whether it's, the snack that they eat or where they got that or who was their hero. And I love asking people who their hero was, because it just says so much about what people do and what they share. I think there's a hesitancy with everybody. And I think social media has been fantastic for shining on people that are shining, but it also is a place that people get caught up in, that everyone, we just finished talking about this on an interview. It's you're afraid when you say something in the land that it never goes away, or it's out there all the time, and you've got to dig past that little personal unlock, and people are like, okay, I'm going to give you this information. And then, I remember doing an interview and I was like, telling Caroline I was a little nervous about revealing certain things. And she's like, look, it's the other side to social media, or when people share, is that, you're yesterday's news in 15 minutes, right? And it's so true how people can get vulnerable and share, and it's impactful, and it's difficult sometimes to get people down to go there. And then realizing that in a month or 2 months from now, because of how fast this all moves, that it's not so scary. It's not so scary. It doesn't.
That's for us, Deb, because we're not too popular yet. But imagine like if you are someone that is really a public figure, like especially like I got what you were saying with, you know, when they say something, they know that it can get back to them. I was watching the daughter of a former president who did a dance on TikTok with her friends, like so many kids do. It went viral in minutes because she's an Obama, and there was nothing wrong with her dance, but it was the big story about take this down and blah blah. So when you're a celebrity, I imagine like this pressure must be like times 100,000, because people love to pick apart what you said and just like be like, oh yes, really, like what type of snack do you like? Oh, Fruit Loops. Oh, that's so sugar and you know.
It's true.
Like,
No, it's totally true. And so we've had guests, like we know some people, and we've said, hey, we want you to come on the show. And they're like, you know what? Either I'm trying to get a contract next year, so I don't want to say anything that's going to be controversial. They know that, hey, if you play in a big market, it again affects you coming on the show. So none of these people who are coming on our show owe us anything. They've got plenty of money. We're not paying them. They don't have anything to sell because they play NHL hockey games or whatever. So none of the people, they're just giving up their time. So they don't need to try and create a story if there isn't one there. It doesn't serve them any purpose. So have to try and figure out the benefit for them. And there really isn't, at the end of the day, other than letting people see a little bit deeper into their life, there is no benefit for them. So you have to treat them a little bit differently. And Twitter, like that social media it can destroy you in a heartbeat. And I, like, whenever I anchored at Sports Center, I never read my Twitter mentions for the whole next day. I would have someone else read them and just say, hey, look, is there anything in there I need to be aware of? Because people would just write shit. Like they would just write stuff to you. They don't have any idea who you are. Like I wouldn't go to your work and go, my God, I think you're terrible at what you do. But you're allowed that, because if you want to be in the public eye, you're going to take that back. And so I always joked, I never wanted to be on YouTube. That was my one thing in life, that I never wanted to mess up and be on. And now I can't get off YouTube. That's all I do. So I just always concerned about screwing something up, and the players are the same way. They just don't want to be engaged in something that's going to have a negative impact.
But I think also though, it's, you know, if we look at 10 years ago and now, the mentalities have changed a little bit. Like 10 years ago was way more private. You know, someone being vulnerable on social media or whatever on a platform would be like the one who's losing it, or, you know, oh my gosh, she's losing it again, so she's telling her life story. But now it's like everyone is telling their life story, so it's not as exceptional when it happens. But it's still, you know, for people who have a salary or a reputation attached to it or a career, it's still very, you know, vulnerable to just be there. But I think that for your players, what you know, when you say they're not bringing anything or it doesn't bring them anything, I think that a huge part that it brings, and I'm not a huge sports fan, but I remember my son is 22 now. When he was in his crazy years of hockey, we would, you know, go to the Bell Center, go anywhere where the players were. And I was always good to be able to end up backstage and having him meet the players. But it's like, even me, I would look at the players like, oh, and I was just like, in my mind, geez, Carolyn, he's like 20. It's just a boy playing, you know, pushing a puck in the net. But it seems like we idealize them a bit more and we see them differently. So it's good actually to have, you know, celebrities, players in whatever area you are in. It's good to have them come down and just hear them talk as human beings. You know, like even me, that my favorite speakers, like I saw an interview with Brene Brown yesterday, and I was telling them, I'm like, I think it was even before she was popular, because it's just a very simple interview. And it's so good to hear her talk like about her everyday life. So it makes us realize that, hey, we're all human. So I think that component is really brought forward with podcasts like we do, like you do, and especially a hockey player. People want to know, like, really, you get up in the morning and you have breakfast like me? really? So anyway.
Yep.
You go.
So what do you, I was just going to say, so you're working on this podcast, you're having a lot of fun. Has there been an interview that's kind of stuck out for you? Someone that you interviewed that was surprising to you or hit home for you, or?
That's a great question, because so far I've known all of these people. None of them have come on the show.
Mhm.
I haven't already known, and Meth has known them as well for the most part. So but like Eric Carlson, there's always some little bit of something from each interview that you go like, I didn't see that coming or whatever. And Eric Carlson talks about, he plays for the San Jose Sharks. And so I asked if he was scared of sharks, whatever. And he said, yes, which led to a whole discussion about being scared of bears. And he talks about how he would he would outrun a bear in the woods and whatnot. Like, you zigzag and then you roll. Like, it's a completely funny, off the wall kind of comment, but it's very entertaining. And I think Brady Tkachuk saying, I'd like to go to an Adele concert. You don't expect to hear from, the macho NHL player and Adele, right? So you expect them to go, oh, I'd like to go see Led Zeppelin or Aerosmith, whatever. I'm dating myself now. So that becomes a thing where you just find out some different info. Best interview, like, we just talked to Nick Foligno recently. He was really, really good. Tessa Bonhomme is a good friend of mine, and she's got great stories. And her and I have, at the World Championships, have been inebriated a couple of times in bars together. And so there's a whole lot of stories that have happened. But probably Nick Foligno was the most engaging and open, only because Mark Mathot and Nick Foligno actually were traded for one another. So Nick came from Ottawa to Columbus, and Meth went from Columbus to Ottawa. And so they'd never really discussed actually being traded for one another before. And that was, God, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. So that was a good part. I really enjoyed that conversation.
There must be so much you learn. It's interesting. So my son-in-law is a referee for the WHL. And, we sat down as we do, and I'm like, so tell me, what is it like for people to not like you? Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
How do you handle that on the ice? Because, it's one thing to be, a player and people are like, hey, and your stats. And I'm like, he goes, oh, so let me tell you. He goes, I've had like food thrown at me, I've had drinks on the ice thrown at me. I mean, it's WHL, not NHL. I'm like, so I go, how does that affect you? And he goes, you just can't let it rattle your cage. You just have to really kind of know who you are, what your rules are. And I think referees in any sport probably have to have a certain kind of disposition to be able to handle that continuum of booing, right? And I think that.
Sorry, you say referees, but think about players. Like, if I look in Montreal when we had Toronto coming, I wouldn't want to be a Toronto player, because they walk here and like they're automatically hated. Well, by part, okay, there's fans and there's not, but or like the Boston or whatever, the Boston. See, that's how knowledgeable I am, or Boston Bruins. But I mean, there's sometimes players, like teams, are hated, and I'm like, how did they even go on the ice and just
Yeah, but I'm going to switch this a little bit. If you're a player and you're coming into a visiting city, you're prepared to know that you're supposed to be hated. If you're an NHL or a WHL official, or you're the local kid down the street, you're not prepared for that, because you're completely separate from both sides. And yet, and so I used to coach some minor hockey, and I remember, like, 2 doors down, my neighbor all of a sudden is skating and he's reffing the game, and he's like 14. And so I pull him over and I'm joking. I'm like, if you don't give me a good game, I'm going to tell your parents, or something silly, whatever. There's adults in the stands going sideways over calls that make nothing is going to happen to your kid if he gets a penalty, or perhaps he misses a call and you lose. They are 12, they're 10. It doesn't, like, can we just grow up as a society for a second and pretend that we're actually normal people? These are, like, you tell him, as a WHL official, I have all the respect in the world for anybody that puts on those kinds of stripes and tries to just go out and make a difference. I have the world of respect for officials. So that's a huge commitment, because there's nothing in it other than, by the end of the day, usually a paycheck, because you don't get any praise. And if they know your name, it's usually not a good thing. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. We talk about that often. And he's like, he goes, I knew I had it when they were throwing food at me game after game after game, because he was in another country, and he was they were throwing food at me, and he goes, it didn't hit me. But I mean, that you just have to kind of get to that place. It's mindset, right? It was mindset, but
right. Yeah. And see, and I'm not there. like I'm pretty thin skinned for what I do. And so
Yeah.
when people say stuff to me, it'll sit with me sometimes and like, it'll bug me at night. And I'm like, why do I let it get to me? And people are like, no, you can't let it get to you. And I'm like, but it does. And I don't know why it does. So I could never be an official. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But
I think like anything, I mean, me and Caroline talk about it often. We teach mindset in our work. I mean, this morning I was kind of, there's a big project that I've got on that I'm mentally preparing myself for. And I put on Creed. I was in the shower and I was listening to the trailer of Creed, kind of like toughening up my head. I think there's some of us that just maybe we're more empathic, but things get under.
But, I think that you also have to remember that whatever role you have and whatever position you have, everyone's human. And it hurts everyone to have critics and everything. And just to get back to your referee thing, I was a hockey mom and I was a soccer mom. And honestly, I found that soccer was even harsher than hockey because my kids were, very competitive. But my son for a while was a referee and I couldn't believe it. I was going to the games that he was reffing just to protect him because we had like people that was like our neighbors and they were like, you're such an idiot. And I was just like, hey, Mary,
Right.
how's it going?
Right. Like people lose their mind over 12-year-olds. And I don't understand it. And I will say, I think I found out like basketball is really bad too. And the only reason that hockey may not be is because if you're in soccer or basketball, it's quieter, right? There's not the whole sound of, so when you were yelling at a ref, he's right there. And I can remember going to basketball games my daughter played and people are like, you are the worst ref. I'm like this guy's going to go home later and he's going to make dinner for his family and he's going to read a book or do it. Like they're just normal people. He's not here to screw you over for the weekend. Like, so anyway.
Or like, my son was doing it was highly paid because he was a ref and it was like $14 an hour. And at some point he's like, Mom, I don't want to do that anymore. And I'm like, it's okay. You did it 3 summers, But yes. So message out there, parents, if your kid is in sports, it's not NHL, it's not the soccer World Cup. And even if it was, there's a way of talking to the refs. And
I became the team photographer. I just wanted to take pictures because I would stand in the corner by myself. So I didn't have to listen to other people bitch and complain about the officiating. I just stood in the corner and just took pictures. So no one had to bother me.
Yeah. But you know what? It seems like we understand it and we relate now because we're talking about simple refs. And I'm saying simple, just like as we talk about civilians, but it's the same thing for celebrities or someone and that's what I really like about talking with you now is that we see you as the guy who was on TSN for all these years on TV and oh my goodness, this is glamour and everything. But when you go home, you still have your wife, you still have your kids, you're still a human being, a father who will bring his kids to sports and everything. So how has the transition been for the family?
Well, I have a teenage daughter, so she pays no attention to me, right? Like we never see her. You know what I'm talking about. So, but they've been really good. And so the one thing I tried to make sure I did was not mope and if I needed a minute, I would just go somewhere else. But I also knew it was important to let them know that I was still grieving a bit. So, and I was always very open. So they were always asking me questions, mostly my son, like, what did you do today? Who did you talk to today? All that stuff. And I would just straight up tell him like, I'm trying to get this sponsor or we're talking to these people. And so he knew things were going to be okay. He knew that I was still there, still present. We'd do whatever. Sit and watch movies together. I just didn't want to shut down completely from them. I knew that was really, really important of how you present yourself to your family is paramount in this, because they're going to remember this. They're not going to remember whatever it is, what Tuesday and I drove him to hockey, but he's going to remember how I reacted in losing my job, which is all life altering. So I was very aware of that. Like, would I sit and drink some wine occasionally? But I wouldn't do it for like the first week or so that I was laid off because I didn't want to think, go drink some stuff. It'll make you feel better. Not like I thought that was important. And looking back, like there's never been a real big lull or anything in the family because I just wanted to make sure it was just business as usual. Don't worry, we have enough money. Everything is going to be fine. And so trying to stay present was important.
And I think it's beautiful because you stayed, it's important to show that, you know, even if you have like a setback, it's not a complete defeat, and you stayed up
Yep.
and you showed like, okay, keep going. And, you know, Deborah and I are both entrepreneurs, and kids learn different things, but they do learn more about, I feel like, yes, there are kids who will ask more questions because they feel more involved. It's not just a 9 to 5 job. It's like they feel more involved because whether you want it or not, you bring it home.
Right. It's
So,
true. And I never had a 9 to 5 job. So it was either you're working at night or you're doing it's all over the place. And my kid, I remember my boy's a huge hockey guy. He plays high level hockey, and we would always watch Sens games together. And he knew that obviously I covered the Sens. And so I had an intimate relationship with them all, but he wasn't sure if he was allowed to watch hockey after I was let go. And so I had to make it a point to sit down, watch TSN or watch hockey with them. So he knew it was okay to enjoy still carrying on watching the Sens. So those little things you don't think of until you're in it. And you're like, I need to make sure that they're taken care of.
And that's part of that's part of the shock too, on how you deal with your own ideas and feelings and what you need and what's private and what's public and what we show the public and what we show our family and who we show our people to. I mean, hats off to you. Caroline knows, everyone knows, it's been listening to me forever. I'm a huge believer in getting outside help. And whether you reached out to a therapist or a counselor or a coach or what have you, sometimes I think it's important to be able to just go somewhere and get what you need so you can come back and be who you need to be to those multiple different people in your life. I got to ask you, so you're in this podcast world now, you're having this great experience, you're kind of on the same side, other side. Where are things going for you guys? Like, are you just in it having fun? Are you at that learning stage? Do you have other aspirations? Like, what's going on?
I just want a job. So if we can turn this into something great, there's as you know, there's a 500 million podcasts and there's new ones every day. And so everybody's trying to be in that space. And so when I bring up the term, we launched a podcast, people are like, oh, right. So but when we did launch, we had, so far we had really good reception and a lot of people are excited. There's nothing really like it in our market. So we've had people reach out who want to sponsor. I think we can make it work. And so part of it was getting the right team. And there's 2 other people that were in this space before, but they're also social media people. Like, they understand how to build around it. They're very smart, very witty. You need to have the right team. And so I didn't want to make it just a podcast, or you say you're on YouTube as well. And I think it's important for the visual aspect. And I'm a TV guy. I don't know any different. I still got makeup left over I got to use. So let's make it a YouTube channel. Right. And so I'm all about having graphics and entertaining stuff and doing it that way. And so far it's been like, people seem to enjoy it. I think we're in, I don't know, sometimes the top 30, top 20 in Canada or whatever it is for sports. We're just trying to plug away here and hopefully something happens. I think it has potential, but as you know, it's a podcast world and it's every day you're on your own. This is the first time I've ever believed in myself or bet on myself for this to happen. I owned my own sports clothing store when I was 19, but this isn't anywhere close to that. This is me. I need to support 3 other people, if you will. So this is a whole level of stress I'm not prepared for, but you just try and do it, right?
I got to say something. That was the best sentence I've heard in a long time in terms of entrepreneurship, because as someone who's been one for 30 years, you know, my son is, you know, when he wanted to be an entrepreneur, I'm like, have you not watched this last 30 years, dude? Like seriously, this may not be the easiest outfit, but when you just said bet on yourself, and that is the true that of an entrepreneur, because push comes to shove, most of your gumption, most of your learning comes from you standing across. I always relate it to boxing because I love boxing. No offense to hockey, but I love boxing. It's a big part of my background, and I box. And so I always love the scene when
never messing with you, just making a mental note. Okay.
Thanks. So in Creed, when Boboa,
she's little, don't worry.
Yeah,
no, she's all fire. No chance I'm messing with her.
Yeah. Hey, I'm trying to give a moment here. I'm trying to have a moment, people. You got 3 podcasters fighting for the air. So, you know, when he takes Creed and he takes him to the mirror, you know, and he's like, I want you to box against yourself. And it was such a monumental moment for me. And I'm like, that is the truth. That's the truth of life. Like,
Yep.
you aren't fighting your opponent. You're not fighting your opponent. It's not who when you go in the ring, it's not, or the team, you're not fighting against that team. You're not trying to win against that team. You're trying to win against you. That's my thing as about an entrepreneur. And when you said bet against yourself, that was the best statement. And one thing about being an entrepreneur that I love that you clearly have is the one step in front of the other. And you may not know where you're going, but you know where you're going. You may not know where you're going, but you know where you're going. It's like, and just to throw it in there, they say that most podcasts, even though there's lots out there, most podcasts don't make it past their 100th show. And the ones that do are the ones that are doing it like you. And obviously hats off to myself and Caroline, the ones that really take it seriously, and they're building a platform around the platform.
Right. And it's all I do. Like,
yeah.
So, which is it's exhausting, but when you start a business, you don't have any choice, right? Like, if I was 19, 20, I'd be sleeping in my car or whatever it is to try and make this thing work. And so people go, well, how long can you do this before you figure it out? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't given that any thought. I don't expect to fail. So, right. You have to try and go, I don't know, what should I have plan B? Like, I don't know. Why would I have plan B? I wouldn't have started plan A. So that's the one. I think, but I do doubt myself sometimes, because how do you not, like, am I crazy for doing this? But I think I can make it work. And so let's give it a shot and see what the hell happens.
So we have our threads that we send each other motivational speech and everything. So I'll start sending you some because now you're an entrepreneur. It is scary, but I feel like it's the most rewarding thing. And, I know you will be successful, because after hours and hours of self-development, one of the big thing is that if you want to succeed in plan A, don't build a plan B.
Yeah.
Because, if you have a crotch that is close to you, hey, I can always go and get it. If you don't, it's like, no, you need to stand up, period. You need to keep on going. So the best way of succeeding is no plan B. And I know it goes against a lot of things that we hear, like always have a plan B, but regardless, it's different when you dive and you're like, I'm starting something. You clearly have everything you need, and like Deb said, sometimes we don't know exactly where we're going. We kind of know we're going up the stairs, but we don't see them all, but we still go one stair after the other because we know we'll get upstairs. So, and if everything fails, you can start makeup tutorial,
I can. I'm a Max C6. I can explain that to anybody. Yeah.
I don't know what it means. So that would attract a lot of attention.
Hey, you know what? I'm going to ask the ultimate question, because I believe we're coming to the wrap up. And I know that you've asked this question many, many times. So I've got to ask you, what's your favorite snack?
I'm a chips guy. And I don't know if I think it's a food group. I don't think it's a snack. Like I will eat. I should not. If they're there, I eat them. So it depends on what the mood is. Hickory sticks are a big one for me, and my dog loves hickory sticks, so we'll sit and share a bag together. But chips, that would be the one. I don't think there's anything better than a bag of chips.
Oh, I can't keep them in the house. I can't do two. I can't do two.
And if I have a sandwich, I have to have chips. Like it's such a useful food. I think it might be the greatest thing invented.
That's awesome. Okay, so here's Brent. I see your future. I see your face endorsing the new flavor of a brand of chips. That I definitely mean with that kind of conviction. There you go. That's your next multiple stream of revenue is going to be an endorsement from a chip company.
Yeah.
The Wally and Methought bag of chips could be. Yeah.
Okay, so we're on a roll here.
Bag of chip.
Caroline, what's your favorite snack?
Oh, that's such a trap because she knows. It's popcorn. Well, it's not any popcorn. It's brown sugar and sea salt popcorn. I'm now down to probably just 3 to 4 bags a week because I used to be one a night. Now I'm staying away with COVID. It really went out. So now there's only one grocery store that has it, and it's a 20-minute drive. So now I'm trying when I go these days not to empty the whole rack, because I did it once and they looked at me and I felt really embarrassed. So I just take 1 or 2 bags and I ration.
I have so many questions right now. So we may need to do part 2, because do you buy it with brown sugar?
It's in there. It's a kind.
Really?
The red bag. There used to be sweet and salty, and then they launched that kind, and oh my goodness. Actually, when COVID hit, I had never done a live on Facebook. And then we had to readjust, for our businesses and everything. And my first live was about popcorn because I was so insulted. I went in and I took 3 bags and the cashier took 2 away. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, well, there's rations. I'm like, what? And
for popcorn?
She rationed my popcorn. So that's how our live started, which brought to the podcast. So you know what? Let's be thankful for popcorn.
I interviewed a couple of players, and one of them, a couple of them said popcorn, but one would go to the movie theater just to buy the popcorn and leave. And I'm like, I've never heard of this. And other people have Uber Eated, had it delivered, and I'm like, this blows my mind.
Okay,
so,
well, I'll tell you after the podcast, not to give any spot of publicity, but the popcorn that I eat, they also have the movie theater one. You should send that to your hockey player, because he's not going to need to go to the movies anymore. It's the same thing.
I never even would have thought of this though. Like, you're pulling up to the movie theater, like, hey, just here for a bag of $9 in gas to get a bag of popcorn. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah, no, I bring my own. I bring my own in my purse. So thank you so much for your time today. And Brent, if we want to listen to you, where can we listen to you?
Go to the YouTube channel, The Wally Method Show. You'll find us there, and all our smiles and doing stupid things like pet tricks, probably. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure spending time with you. And as usual, I'll leave the final word to Deb, because she really likes to have it.
See, that's the pot, Brent. That's the pot. And she told me that's the pot. That's the kind of the final piece. Well, I know you didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you what my favorite snack is.
Right. We're not going to hear the end of this now.
Yeah. So this, and then I go boxing. It's fine. So it's coconut. It's an ice cream made out of coconut.
I've heard of this.
It's coconut bliss ice cream, and there's no calories. So I literally can eat the whole tub guilt-free.
Now, okay, hold on a second. You're telling me you can eat a whole tub of ice cream and there's nothing in it that you shouldn't be consuming on a high level?
It's sugar-free, dairy-free, gluten-free,
no,
vegan.
No.
There has to be some chemicals in it.
Are you eating air?
Pretty well. Air and coconut.
Yeah. It seems a little shady that they're leaving out some ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty shady. It's pretty shady.
I agree.
There you go. Just wanted to say it. So anyways, it was such a pleasure to have you. You know what? I'd love to see this happen again in a few more months, because what's going to happen, that entrepreneurial mind is just going to continue on, and you're going to be so far ahead. I'd love to have you back and just see where you guys are at.
I ordered some mugs, so I'm really excited.
I can't wait to buy your chips. I can't wait to buy your chip brand.
That'll be big sellers.
Well, congratulations on, and welcome into the world of entrepreneurship. It gets better and funky from here, my friend.
I'll take your word for it.
All right.
Well, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.